The first thing I noticed wasn't my daughter's face. It was her hands. I was standing on the porch of the house I'd built for her, the house I'd spent 12 years in Edmonton working double shifts to pay off, and through the front windows, I could see her on her knees scrubbing the kitchen floor. Her hands moved in slow, defeated circles, the kind of movement that has no hope left in it. I hadn't called ahead. I'd wanted to surprise her. I stood there with my suitcase handle still in my grip, the Alberta wind cutting through my coat, and I could not make myself ring the doorbell. My daughter was 31 years old. She owned a 3-bedroom house in Kelowna outright. No mortgage, no debt, mine to give and hers to keep. I'd signed the deed over to her the year I left. I'd also left her the catering business my mother started, the one I'd built up for 15 years before I moved. A small operation, yes, but steady. Enough to live on. Enough to grow. What I was looking at through that window looked like neither of those things. She was wearing a grey t-shirt I didn't recognize. Her hair pulled back with an elastic, the kind you find at the bottom of a drawer. There was a mop bucket beside her and a pair of rubber gloves on the floor that weren't hers. Too large for her hands, the kind men wear. She wasn't cleaning her own home. She was cleaning someone else's version of it. I could feel the difference even through the glass. I rang the doorbell. The way she startled, that broke something in me right there on the porch. She came to the door and opened it only partway, the way people do when they're not sure they're allowed to open it fully. She looked at me for a long moment before anything registered on her face. Then her mouth opened and she said, "Mom," like it was a question she wasn't sure she had the right to ask. I pulled her into my arms. She was thinner than I remembered. Much thinner. "Who's here?" The voice came from somewhere behind her, deeper in the house. A man's voice, flat, entitled. The kind of voice that doesn't rise at the end of a question because it already knows the answer doesn't matter. My daughter stepped back from me. Something shifted in her posture. Her shoulders pulled in, just slightly, just enough that you'd notice if you'd known her whole life. "It's my mother," she said toward the hallway. A man appeared. He was maybe 35, broad-shouldered, wearing a house shirt like he owned the place. He looked me up and down the way people look at something that's arrived at an inconvenient time. "She didn't say you were coming," he said to me. "No," I said. "She didn't know." He nodded slowly, like he was deciding something. Then he turned and walked back down the hallway without another word. My daughter watched him go. Then she looked at me with an expression I didn't have a name for yet, somewhere between relief and fear, and something that might have been shame. She stepped aside to let me in. I want to tell you that I understood right away, that I walked in and immediately grasped what had happened to my child in the 12 years I'd been away. But the truth is that understanding came slowly, the way cold gets into a house. Not all at once, but through every small gap you didn't think to seal. I'd gone to Edmonton in 2012. My sister had been sick, genuinely sick, the kind of sick that needs someone there, and I'd gone for 6 months, and then 6 months became a year, and then my sister needed ongoing care, and I found work at a seniors facility there, better pay than I'd ever made. And I kept telling myself I'd go back to Kelowna as soon as things settled, as soon as I saved a little more, as soon as my daughter was more stable. I called every week at first, then every 2 weeks. Then my daughter's calls became shorter, more careful, and when I asked her how things were, she always said fine in a way that meant she was not alone when she was speaking. I should have gotten on a plane sooner, I know that. I've known it for years. There is no version of this story where I don't carry that. But I'm here now. That's what I kept telling myself as I set my suitcase down in the front hallway and looked around the house I'd bought with 12-hour nursing shifts and no vacations, and a savings account I never touched. The living room furniture was not mine. The curtains were not mine. There were photographs on the wall of people I didn't know, and none of my daughter's childhood photos anywhere that I could see. The kitchen where my mother used to make butter tarts at Christmas, had been redone in a style that looked like a magazine and felt like a hotel. My daughter made tea. She moved around the kitchen quietly, efficiently, in that particular way of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible. Her husband, I'll call him what he was, though it takes something from me to do it, came back into the kitchen and sat down at the table like he was expecting to be served. My daughter brought him a mug without being asked. She did not sit down herself. I watched this. I said nothing, yet I was still taking inventory. His name was Shane. They'd met 4 years after I left, at some event a mutual friend had organized, and my daughter had called to tell me about him, with a lightness in her voice I'd missed hearing. She'd seemed happy. She'd seemed settled. He had a job in property management, she said. He was reliable. He was there. That last part, I'd been grateful for it at the time. What I learned over the next 3 days, and I learned it piece by piece, the way you do when someone has been trained not to say things directly, was this. Shane had moved into the house 18 months after they started dating. He'd brought his mother with him. That detail came out almost accidentally on the first evening when I asked where I'd be sleeping, and my daughter's eyes went somewhere complicated before she said the guest room was being used. By whom? I asked. By his mother, she said. She's been staying with us. How long? I asked. 4 years, she said, and then she looked away. The catering business, my mother's business, the one I'd handed to my daughter with a client list and equipment and a reputation built over 20 years, had been dissolved. Shane had decided it wasn't profitable enough, my daughter told me, and he'd arranged the paperwork. She'd signed things when she wasn't well, she said quietly, during a winter when she'd had pneumonia and could barely sit up. He'd brought her the papers one evening and said it was just to simplify things. I kept my face still. I was very good at keeping my face still by then. 12 years in a care facility teaches you that. His mother, it turned out, had started a cleaning company, and my daughter was her primary employee, in her own home, on a schedule that someone else had set. I asked my daughter if she was being paid. She didn't answer right away. Then she said that it was a household arrangement, that it evened out. I went to bed that first night and I lay in my daughter's childhood bed, the one I'd moved to the spare room when they'd taken over the master. And I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about every phone call in which she'd said fine, and I had let her. I got up at 5 in the morning, which is the time I always get up, old habit, and I sat in the kitchen with my tea, and I did 3 things. I called my lawyer. She's a woman I've known for 20 years, sharp and quiet, and someone who does not waste words. I told her what I'd seen. I told her about the business dissolution papers signed during an illness. I told her about the house and the deed, and what felt, to my eyes, like an occupation. She asked me a few questions. Then she said, "Don't say anything to anyone yet. I need to see the property records." The second thing I did was call my daughter's oldest friend, a woman who'd grown up 3 streets away, and who I'd watched eat dinner at my table more times than I could count. She answered on the second ring like she'd been waiting for someone to call. She talked for 40 minutes. I mostly listened. The third thing I did was make butter tarts, my mother's recipe. I needed something to do with my hands. My daughter came downstairs at 7 and found me in the kitchen and started to tell me I didn't have to do that, and I handed her a tart and told her to sit down and eat it while it was warm. She sat, she ate, and for a moment she looked the age she actually was instead of the age she seemed to have become. Shane came down at 9. He saw the tarts and took 2 without asking and ate them standing at the counter, looking at his phone. His mother appeared at 9:30 in a housecoat, looked at me, looked at the tarts, looked at my daughter, and said, "Are we having guests?" I said, "I'm not a guest. I own this house." She looked at Shane. Shane looked at his phone. My lawyer called me back that afternoon. The deed, she said, was complicated. There had been a transfer, not of the full property, but of a partial interest, registered 18 months ago. My daughter's signature was on it, so was Shane's. It had been done through a notary my daughter didn't choose, and had never met before or since. When my lawyer said the notary's name, I wrote it down. I asked my daughter about the transfer. That evening after Shane had gone to watch television, we were at the kitchen table and I'd made soup, something I knew she liked, and I waited until she'd eaten most of it before I asked. She looked at her bowl. She said she hadn't fully understood what she was signing. Shane had said it was something to do with tax efficiency. His mother had been there. The notary had come to the house. She'd been tired. She said she'd been tired a lot around that time. I reached across the table and I put my hand over hers. I said, "I need you to trust me for a little while. Can you do that?" She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet. She said, "I've been waiting for you to come home, Mom." That is the sentence I will carry for the rest of my life. My lawyer flew in from Calgary 4 days later. I'd asked her to come in person and she'd said yes without needing a reason. We met at a coffee shop on Bernard Avenue, just the 2 of us, and she laid out what she'd found. The property transfer was a partial interest claim. 25% of the assessed value of the house registered in Shane's name. It had been done in a way that was legal on its surface but rested entirely on my daughter's signature. Under conditions that could, my lawyer said carefully, be questioned. The business dissolution had been cleaner. The company had been wound down legitimately, all filings in order. But the timing and the circumstances of the signing were worth examining. There was also the matter of the cleaning work. His mother had registered a small business. My daughter was listed as a worker. There were no pay stubs. I drank my coffee. My lawyer looked at me. "How do you want to proceed?" she asked. I thought about my daughter eating that butter tart at 7 in the morning like it was the first quiet moment she'd had in years. "Carefully," I said, "and completely." We started with the property. My lawyer filed a challenge to the partial transfer on the basis of undue influence, the illness, the unfamiliar notary, the lack of independent legal advice, the presence of the person who stood to benefit. These things matter in law, especially in BC, especially with the right documentation. Then we went to employment standards. My daughter had been performing work, cleaning, cooking, managing the household operations of a registered business, with no employment record and no compensation. That is not a household arrangement. That is wage theft. I did not tell Shane what was happening. I made soup. I made tea. I asked his mother politely if she took 1 sugar or 2. I sat at the kitchen table in the evenings and listened to her talk about her cleaning business like it was something she'd built herself. And I smiled, and I said nothing. There is a particular kind of patience that comes from raising a child alone and working nights for 12 years, and watching someone you love suffer without knowing how to help. I had that patience. I used it. The morning the process server arrived at the door, I was in the kitchen making oatmeal. Shane opened the door. I heard the exchange from where I was standing. I heard his voice change register. I heard his mother's footsteps on the stairs. I stirred the oatmeal. My daughter came and stood in the kitchen doorway. She looked at me. I looked at her. "It's okay," I said. "Come have breakfast." She sat down at the table her grandmother had bought 40 years ago. I'd had it shipped from storage the week before. Replaced the glass and chrome thing Shane had installed. And she picked up her spoon and she ate. The legal process took 7 months in total. The partial property transfer was voided by the BC Supreme Court on grounds of procedural impropriety and lack of independent advice at time of signing. Shane was ordered to vacate within 60 days. His mother's business was investigated by employment standards. A settlement was reached that I will not detail here except to say that my daughter received what she was owed. Shane hired a lawyer. His lawyer wrote letters. My lawyer wrote back. Shane attended one mediation session and said very little. His lawyer said more, but it didn't help him. He and his mother were gone by February. The night they left, my daughter and I sat in the living room with the furniture I'd found in storage, and we watched the snow come down over the lake. She had a cup of tea. I had one too. We didn't talk much. There wasn't a lot that needed to be said right then, but at some point she said, "I didn't think anyone was going to come." And I said, "I know. That's on me. I'm sorry." She looked at the snow for a while. Then she said, "You came though." That was enough for that night. The catering business took longer to rebuild than the house did. The equipment had been sold. Some of it we couldn't trace. Some of it we found listed on a resale site, and my daughter's friend, the one who'd talked to me for 40 minutes that first morning, helped us buy it back. The client list was gone, but the relationships weren't. People remembered my mother. People remembered my daughter. Word got around. By the following spring, she had bookings again. Small ones at first. A retirement party in West Kelowna. A baby shower in the Okanagan Centre. A corporate lunch that led to 2 more. I stayed. I want to be clear about that. I'm not going back to Edmonton. My time there was what it needed to be, and it's done. I'm 63 years old, and I am not spending what comes next somewhere else while my daughter rebuilds something that should never have been taken from her. I sleep in the room that used to be the guest room, which is now just my room. In the mornings I make tea, and sometimes I make butter tarts. My daughter comes downstairs and she sits at the kitchen table, her grandmother's table, and she eats breakfast like someone who has been given permission to be at home again. She opened her second booking this spring on a Saturday in May, a wedding in the winery district, and she came home afterward with flour on her coat and tired. In a good way. The kind of tired that belongs to you. And she sat down and told me about every dish she'd made and every table she'd set and every small thing that had gone right. I listened to every word. I have thought many times about the 12 years I was away, about every phone call where I heard fine, and told myself it was enough. I will not make peace with that entirely. I don't think I'm supposed to, but I know that I came back. I know that I stayed, and I know that the things that were taken from my daughter were given back, one by one, through law and patience and butter tarts, and the particular stubbornness of a woman's, who has been a mother long enough to know when her child needs her to stop waiting and simply come home. The catering business is registered again. Her name is on it, only her name. The deed to the house has one name on it too, hers.